And good afternoon, fellow Earthlings.
That's right.
Here we are in Washington, D.C., planet Earth, surrounded by a universe of trillions of stars and trillions of planets. And sometimes when we can actually see the stars at night, we're reminded of some really important but unanswered questions, such as, what is our human place in the universe? Are we humans alone in the universe? Who are we humans really? And those questions are at the core of the reasons for sending humans to Mars on an internationally supported mission. And I think it's very important that be humans. And that will help solve, if we do that, that will help solve one of the biggest problems we have on this planet. And that is that we have way too much violent conflict based on superficial human identity differences. And the solution is to base our human identity core on science. And an international mission to Mars will do that because it will encourage worldwide science education. It will cultivate a global human identity core. It will lift human life to a higher level of authenticity. And it will foster a more peaceful human civilization. And those are just the main reasons. There are several other reasons. Now, what is human identity? Well, obviously it's made up of many different factors, but some of the major ones are our gender, race, language, nationality, religion, and our place in the universe. Now, Amartya Sen, who is from India and won the Nobel Prize in Economics several years ago, wrote a book entitled Identity and Violence, where he summarizes this problem. He wrote that many of the conflicts and barbarities in the world are sustained through the illusion of a unique and choiceless identity, and that results in homespun elemental violence or globally artful violence and terrorism. And that was confirmed by a 2014 Pew report. That report showed that there is religion-related terrorism in 82 nations in the world, or 41% of all nations in the world. And Amartya Sen says the solution to this problem is to see ourselves as planetary citizens, and a global identity can receive its due without eliminating our other loyalties. In other words, we can see ourselves as planetary citizens, but retain our nationality, our religion, and our language, and all of that. Now, Steven Weinberg, who won the Nobel Prize for Physics back in 1979, made a statement that gets at the core of our human inauthenticity, where he said that the effort to understand the universe is one of the few things that lifts human life a little above the level of farce. And we do spend a lot of time in what I would call human escapisms. Like some people I know watch television, football for hours on end. That's basically an escapism. And in fact, 2/3 of the people in North America now cannot see the glow of the Milky Way galaxy because of our own human-made light. And you could say that we're hiding in our own light, both philosophically and factually speaking. But the good news is, at the very moment that we make the decision to do something like sending humans to Mars on an internationally supported mission, there will be some benefits that are immediate. And that is explained by Nathaniel Branden, where he wrote that the only authentic basis of self-esteem is an unbreached determination to use one's mind to the fullest of one's ability and a refusal to ever evade one's knowledge or act against it. Now that's not easily done. That takes some discipline, and we don't have to do it all the time, but just some of the time. And one of the best ways to use our minds to the fullest is to do science, or to use the results of science. And that can be done in basically three ways. One is to predict and influence nature to produce life-enhancing technology. And of course, we've done that to a huge extent. We've surrounded ourselves with things like cell phones, computers, television, all kinds of transportation devices. The second way is that we produce weapons to threaten or kill other humans, and unfortunately we do that to a huge extent also. And the third way that we could use science is to do it the way that science began. Science began by searching for human meaning and identity several centuries ago. But we've largely pushed that aside lately in favor of the first two. But the good news is there are some signs that we are doing a resurgence in using science to search for human meaning and identity. And a good example of that is a book entitled Science and the Quest for Meaning by Alfred Taubert. He wrote in that 2009 book that the role of science in defining personal identity cannot be overemphasized. In other words, we need to become more aware of how we're actually using science. Wernher von Braun, and I'm sure just about everybody in the room knows who that is, right? He said, by going into outer space, we will find ourselves. In other words, by exploring beyond our own planet Earth, we will discover something new about our human identity. Now, what does human identity have to do with exploring Mars? Well, I think obviously one of the main questions is about life on Mars. For instance, if we were to discover a DNA or maybe an RNA, whichever way you want to look at it, life form, that would mean that we're probably related to it, could have descended from it, and in a sense we could be Martians. On the other hand, if we were to discover non-DNA life form on Mars, that would mean that, well, that'd be a good indication that other life forms have evolved commonly throughout the universe, and perhaps some of them into advanced civilizations. And of course, identity is a powerful influence on human identity, or on human behavior. We behave according to who we think we are and what we think we can do. Now, I made this cartoon to reflect what I most commonly hear when I do this presentation, and I've done it about 40 times, but it's been different every time. It's two guys talking on the earth. First one says, before we waste money on sending people to Mars, we need to solve problems here on Earth. I've heard that many times. And the second guy says, yeah, we need to wait until we are finished killing each other with trillion-dollar wars to prove whose God is really God. And someone from the audience one time kind of yelled out and said, that's too true to be funny. And I think that's correct. And this 2016 federal U.S. budget reflects that, shows that the military gets 16% of the total budget, and NASA gets only 0.49%. And Charles Bolden, the NASA administrator, gets an annual salary of $179,000 a year. Well, that's a decent salary, isn't it? But on the other hand, Nick Saban, the Alabama football coach, gets over $7 million a year. We should be as interested in exploring our next door neighbor planet as we are in playing football. Now, way back in 1960, Marshall McLuhan saw all of these communication satellites being launched around the world and interconnecting the entire world with instantaneous global communication. And he coined the term global village. Anyway, he coined the term global village. That was back in the 1960s. And not too long after that, the astronaut Edgar Mitchell, in a way, confirmed that concept when he said that seeing the Earth from space produced instant global consciousness, and I came back to Earth no longer an American citizen, but a planetary citizen. And this same concept has been expressed by several different astronauts, including one from Saudi Arabia. Let's see, what did you do to get it going?
I had to keep clicking the forward arrow, this one.
There you go. Yeah, the astronomer Jill Tarter said that we are all earthlings. We owe it to each other to celebrate our commonality rather than our perceived differences. And this is a common thought, common theme expressed by people who think about what lies beyond the earth. And there was a report, I think it was 2008, that showed that more and more people are seeing themselves as planetary citizens, especially younger people. And this is something I found surprising. I read the book John F. Kennedy and the Race to the Moon by John Logsdon, and he revealed that in 1963, Kennedy proposed sending representatives of all countries to the moon with a global approach to space exploration. And he asked, why should man's first flight to the moon be a matter of national competition? And he was in the process of negotiating to do this with Khrushchev when he was assassinated. So we ended up in a race between the US and the Soviets, and when we got to the moon, we planted the US flag there. But what I'm saying is it would have been much more diplomatic and more beneficial to all humanity if we had had the maturity to have planted the flag of Earth on the moon rather than the US flag, just as they're doing here at the Antarctica, at the South Pole. Now, the Reverend Dr. Fraser Watts, a professor of theology and science, made the statement not too long ago that religion is associated with culture and identity and is a source of tension. And he also said that science is the most genuinely international movement in the world order and therefore a force for peace and stability. And a good example of scientific worldwide cooperation is the Large Hadron Collider. It's supported by 60 different nations, including the US, cost about $10 billion, located near Geneva, Switzerland. And about 2 years ago, they announced that they found the fundamental particle of the universe, the Higgs boson particle. And this kind of international scientific cooperation will enable all humanity to better understand how the universe actually works from a scientific viewpoint. Now, on the other hand, we humans compete in many different ways. There is global competition in products and labor, and there's competition for NASA contracts. And I'm sure most of you can guess where this NASA pin I have on my lapel was manufactured, right? Anybody want to guess?
We're in China.
China. Yes, I don't know if it's red or not, but it's China. But a mission to Mars should not be a competition between nations. It should be a cooperative effort. And Martin Nowak of Harvard University did some research about human cooperation, and well, cooperation basically. He had an article in the, I believe it was July 2012 issue of Scientific American, entitled "The Evolution of Cooperation." And in that article he wrote that instead of opposing competition, cooperation has operated alongside it from the get-go to shape the evolution of life on Earth. In other words, I think you could say that we humans are as successful as we are because we have evolved to cooperate as well as compete. And Catherine Newell, who lectures on religion and science, asked back in 2014, what would happen if the exploration of the real frontier of Mars was portrayed as a triumph of global scientific cooperation? And that's exactly the question I think we should endeavor to answer. And back in 2006, the NASA Ames Research Center held a conference that was made up of mostly younger people. And one of their major conclusions was that international collaboration is not only vital to sending humans to Mars, but should be one of the most important reasons for going in the first place. In other words, if we accomplish nothing else by sending humans to Mars, we should do it on a cooperative basis in order to reduce some of this ridiculous conflict that we have going on in the world today. And in my research, I found that there are 4 NASA project leaders that stated that international cooperation is essential for sending humans to Mars. And there are many examples of international space cooperation going on now, and they keep increasing. The Mars Society Convention obviously draws participants from all over the world, and in fact the analog crew tag for this year has the 8 national flags on it, 8 different nations. And there was a simulated mission to Mars in Moscow back in 2012 that consisted of a crew of Russians, Chinese, Frenchmen, and Colombian. And the Russians have expressed a desire to have a joint mission with the United States. And the ExoMars project is a cooperative effort between the Europeans and the Russians to do a Mars orbiter lander project back in 2018. And the International Space Station has 16 nations participating. And the Russians have been providing transportation to get up to it for several years now. And the Chinese asked to join several years ago, but the United States Congress excluded China, and I think that was a serious mistake. It was a serious mistake because China now has their own very viable space program. They have already launched a moon rover and an experimental space lab, and they have in their plans to launch a Mars rover and a 3-pod space station, and they have signed a cooperative agreement with the European Space Agency and the Russians, and they invite international cooperation to whoever is interested. And Jan Wernher, the European Space Agency director, in this year, 2016, made the statement that our globe deserves cooperation beyond national vanity and beauty contests. I think the United States needs to listen to that. And back in August of 2012, about 2 weeks before the Curiosity rover landed on Mars, I did an at-random street survey in northwest Arkansas where I asked 50 people, and 47 out of those 50 people didn't know anything about the Curiosity rover. Now, I think that tells us that probably almost any humans to Mars mission would be much more interesting to the general public than a robotic mission. And I disagree with the people who say that those were results because it was Arkansas. You don't know Northwest Arkansas. Northwest Arkansas is a kind of a mini global village. And I did another survey last summer, 2015, where I asked 200 people at random on the streets in 8 central states. I asked them, do you think it would be a good idea to create a worldwide cooperative mission to send a crew representing all citizens of Earth to explore our next door neighbor planet Mars? And 34.5% said no, some of them very strongly. But on the other hand, 65.5% said yes. I was surprised. That tells me that there's more interest than most of us realize in the general public to send a cooperative effort to send humans to Mars. Now, Jeffrey Bennett, who's an astrophysicist and he has written several books about astronomy, wrote that a little perspective on our place in the universe makes any form of geographic, ethnic, or religious hatred seem just plain ridiculous. And he also wrote that we can grow up and solve our problems only by exploring the universe beyond the Earth. And I talked to him in person a couple of years ago, and he stands by those comments. So, an internationally supported mission to Mars should invite every nation to participate at whatever level they're capable of, even if it's just sweeping a floor somewhere. And every continent needs to be represented by a crew member in some manner. And all of the proceedings need to be translated into all the major languages of the world so that everyone feels included. And it could be the ultimate live television report from the crew as they leave the Earth, approach Mars, walk on the red dust of our next door neighbor planet Mars, and then begin to return to the Earth. I think such a live television report from the crew would inspire all humanity. So, an international Humans to Mars mission can help civilize Earth in these ways: lift human life to a higher level of authenticity, cultivate a global human identity core, increase our human self-esteem and confidence, share mission costs among nations, increase humanity's security by moving toward a second planetary home, and encourage worldwide science education, create jobs and prosperity, produce authentic novelty and excitement to inspire all humanity, and finally, foster a wiser and more peaceful human civilization. Any comments, questions, insults? Yeah.
Well, I don't know exactly what you mean by cooperation. Does that mean we pay for everything and just invite other people to participate, or do you mean that they should also contribute financially?
Oh, I think some of the nations could participate financially, but some obviously are too poor. Those would be the ones that would do smaller tasks. I can remember doing sometime during the Apollo project in the 1960s, I happened to stop by this small machine shop in southwestern Missouri, which is a very rural area. It's part of the Ozarks, they call it. And guess what they were doing? They were turning down impellers for the Saturn V rocket in that little tiny machine shop. Yeah.
Did you give this, I think you gave this presentation the last Morris conference.
I did, and yeah, I did.
I'll run the same objections.
Okay, sure.
This is, I saw Apollo Soyuz come and go. I've seen ISS go up. Unfortunately, what we're fighting about, much of what we're fighting about, is exactly what that core global identity is supposed to be. We've got a variety of competing points of view the point of view that you are talking about here is basically the Western point of view. It has little congruence in the Middle East, where basically what we're seeing is the power of organized hate. If we go to Mars and we do it cooperatively, when we get back, ISIS will still be ISIS, or something like it will still be there. The theocrats in Iran will still be the theocrats in Iran. Putin will still be Putin, and the Chinese will still be the Chinese, and Trump will still be out there making noise. It's not going to change anything.
I think it will change how we hate people so much that we want to kill them. I read so many accounts where people in the military actually sometimes have difficulty knowing who to shoot. And what I'm trying to do here is point out, if we have a common human identity core, we'll be less likely to want to settle differences by killing somebody.
We don't have a common human identity.
Yes, but this will help build.
It doesn't
Okay,
exist.
Mike.
I think it's true. Putin will be Putin and all the other things he said, but what happened here is the youth of the world will have a little bit different view that we are all together on this planet and not in hopes that these.
Peace will come, they said
Yes.
in the 1960s.
Excuse me,
Yes.
I think it's becoming clear with every passing month that it's very possible, maybe even likely, that China will lead an international effort to colonize Mars. And they will ship in a lot of money and resources and talent, along with the European Space Agency, along with Russia, Australia, India, any country that wishes to join in that international effort. Now, the resistance will come from both right-wing people like Trump and some so-called allegedly liberals in this country who don't want that kind of an international cooperative effort that you advocate and that I agree with. The youth in this country and around the world want to go to Mars. And we want to cooperate with different people around the world to do that. And we don't hold these old ideas from the 1950s and 60s, oh, the red communist Chinese, and oh, those Ruskies, and all that other BS that we got back then. That's the youth of this country. They are optimistic, and I'm old, and I'm still optimistic, and not pessimistic about whether human species can go to Mars. We can, and we will, and if
Yes.
China leads it, more power to them. Let me know.
Does it
Yes,
have
we
to be a
have-
nation state?
I'm sorry?
Does it have to be nation sponsored? Can it be?
No, it doesn't have to be.
Group of.
It could be anybody that can organize it. Is it 2:30 or 3?
Oh, no, it's
And
you've
if
got
you
like
try
a
to
minute.
cooperate with
You
China,
can take a
you think
couple
you should
more
go to jail?
Are we done? I'm sorry.
Under the current law, he would go to prison, Elon Musk. He's right.